Welcome to the Training Ground Guru podcast in association with Teamworks Intelligence. In every episode, we bring you insights into the teams behind the teams in professional football. Coming up on today's episode.
When credibility is everything, and I guess your opinion is all you have as your badge of honour, I'm usually very calculated, let's say, with how I view a player, because I'm aware that so many things can happen. But I think in the case of Lucas Bergvall here, is a genuine generational talent.
I'm Simon Austin from Training Ground Guru, and our guest on this episode is Rob Mackenzie. Rob is the head of scouting at Tottenham Hotspur and has also been head of recruitment at Aston Villa and Leuven in Belgium, as well as being head of technical scouting at Leicester City. In this episode, Rob told me what his job involves, how his team go about finding the right players for Spurs, and how he's helped uncover players like Riyad Mahrez and John Duran during a career spanning 2 decades. We hope you enjoy this episode, and if you do, please give us a follow via your preferred podcast provider. Thanks very much for joining us on the podcast, Rob.
It's my absolute pleasure, Simon. I know it's been a busy couple of weeks for yourself with the conference that you were so fantastically involved in last week. So now, look, I appreciate you taking the time and being willing to speak to me. So look, the pleasure's all mine.
Yeah, brilliant. And I've been trying to persuade you to come on this podcast for seems like years. So delighted to finally get you on.
Well, let's hope it's something worth waiting for. Now, look, I appreciate very much what you've brought to the industry in highlighting, I guess, the sheer layers and depth of what goes on behind the scenes. I know myself as a practitioner within the industry that find your insight, articles, interviews, podcasts, conferences thoroughly useful and enjoyable. So look, as I say, I'm more than happy to contribute, and hopefully, compared to the level of people that you've had on before, I'll hold my own and do okay.
So to start with, you've had many different titles within the industry. You've been head of scouting, head of recruitment, head of technical scouting, I think yep. Head of player ID. Some people can find it quite confusing what these different roles mean to start with. So now you are head of scouting at Tottenham. What does that involve? Could you just give us an overview, please?
Sure. And as you say, look, I think, Simon, the reality within the industry is that clubs have such varied structures. They have such varied existing amounts of people with titles that also almost have to be honoured and worked with upon joining a club, for example. So I think someone's job title can actually mean many different things, even if it's the same title in this one club as maybe it is in another. Regarding myself, at the moment at Tottenham Hotspur, privileged to be the head of scouting, so my responsibility is to manage a team of 10 people at the moment, plus myself, within senior or first team scouting. So we're responsible for the identification and assessment and recommendation collectively of players from U19 international age groups up to first team. So that remit, if you like, falls under us as a department. Myself specifically, in addition to managing those individuals, instilling the processes, I guess my role is to support the technical director, Johan Lange, head coach Thomas Frank and his staff when we start initiating the discussions around what's required within our own squad, both here and now, but also in the future. And then I guess in the case of those meetings and discussions, bringing to life the stories and cases of players that we as a department position to be the most appealing, applicable, interesting, however you want to describe it. So it's bringing those to life and trying to showcase why we think they're a really good fit, along with obviously managing and assessing any players that come the other way from the head coach and his staff in exactly the same way. And then I guess I play a more introductory role when it comes to agents, from almost explaining our potential interest in a player where we feel they might sit within our thinking at any given time. Prior to that, then I guess if it gets more serious in terms of our interest in it progressing to almost the more financial stage, let's say, then I pass that baton on to Johan Lange. So I guess my role's quite varied. Within that, obviously, myself, I'm out on the road scouting players live, because again, if I'm to be the mouthpiece of the department, I have to have a very strong opinion myself and have to be essentially convinced about the players that we're suggesting being the right ones. Otherwise, that's not a fantastic place to be in. So yeah, I wear different hats across the role really, and it's quite varied, even though it's specifically focused on recommending the best players possible for us in the marketplace.
And those 10 staff who work under you,
Yep.
Are they all based in this country? Are they all with the title of scout?
So we've got quite a variety, to be honest. We have 3 people based abroad. So in our case, that's João Ferreira, Giuseppe Di Credico and Max Legat. So they're responsible for their own competition predominantly, whilst also scouting comprehensive Leuven competitions that we kind of distribute between the group. So
Sorry to cut in, Rob. What countries are they based in, those 3?
So João's
regions?
João's based in Portugal. Giuseppe, probably no surprise, based on his name. He's based in Italy, and Max is based in Germany. So my aim, look, everybody who approaches this, I guess, logistical task, let's say, they do it in a totally different way, but our priority has always been ensuring that we have the right people. Actually being able to travel anywhere to watch football is arguably, from a logistical perspective, as easy as it's ever been. So we actually prioritise the individual over the location. So as an example, I think Giuseppe and Max came through a process that we ran about 15 months ago. Yourselves at Training Ground Guru helped bring interest and exposure to the advert that we ran then, similar to also what we're doing now. So as I say, the priority is not necessarily where they're based, and yeah, you can get some benefits from people being based in different countries. For example, intel, character insight, a real finger on the pulse when it comes to market dynamics within that country or that competition. But for us, it's more about who they are, how do they see the game, how do they think, because I think personally that's where, if you can align a group of people with a firm understanding of what it is you're looking for, also what it is that you're not looking for, that surely is what's going to lean towards you being able to work in the most efficient way, not necessarily where they live. So we have Seb Tagizadeh, who's fulfills a similar role but's based in the UK. So we have those 4 in addition to Alex Fraser, our chief scout, who's also based in the UK. So we have, I guess, those 5 from a predominantly hands-on scouting, and not exclusive, but close to perspective, in addition to myself. And then we have a team of recruitment analysts who are, I guess, more hybrid in their skill set. So they do very much assist with the live scouting, video scouting, but they're also responsible for player profiling and bringing players against stories to life internally for us within the department. And then we have, as every department relies upon, we have somebody who can piece it all together in terms of assisting with the travel logistics, meeting logistics. Whenever we invite people over, it's obviously so vitally important to ensure that first impression is as good as it possibly can be. So Jamie Bryan, as our scouting coordinator, does a fantastic role in that for us. He's based at the training ground. And then we also have Joe Bucknell as our lead scouting insights analyst. I think I've got his job title right there. And his role is assisting us exclusively within the scouting department with regards to data and objective insight. And he does a fantastic job in ensuring that across both identification and assessment, we have as much of a comprehensive understanding of what a player is currently doing, what they're potentially capable of doing. And yeah, that's something that we're able to understand longitudinally throughout their career. So that level of contribution to the department is really invaluable.
Yeah. And we see the transfers happen within the transfer windows, but is it an ongoing process then where you're looking at players, deciding who you want to bring into the squad, how you want to shape it as a collective?
100%. I think anybody in my role at any club will tell you exactly the same. Look, you are continually assessing your own players week in, week out, let's be honest, when they perform for your club in your shirt. You're continually updating your knowledge and understanding about them, what they're potentially capable of doing, both short, medium term, maybe also in the long term. There's so many factors that go into hopefully being able to build a complementary and effective squad that those moving parts shift, change within season, out season. So yeah, look, we obviously as well have an idea of what we believe an optimal squad looks like. For example, I'm fortunate in obviously the level of club that I work for, that we compete in UEFA competitions. So you have obviously not only the Premier League squad rules to navigate, but you also have UEFA squad rules to navigate. So as I say, you have all these moving parts. You obviously have injuries that can happen both in season and during transfer windows, as we've experienced recently. So look, yeah, you are always I wouldn't even say one eye. You best have both eyes on not only the next couple of windows, i.e. season, so a January and a summer, but look, you're also looking beyond that. You know the contract expiries of your own players. You know the ones you want to renew, the extend, the ones that maybe is actually the prime opportunity to trade them. Obviously, externally, you have players' contractual situations changing frequently as well. So yeah, look, I guess it's a difficult role to almost take a breath in and sit and reflect on maybe what's been. So, for example, very objectively, I think we had a successful transfer window in the summer, and we've brought in players capable of influencing our 11 and enhancing our performance in the Premier League. But there's also no opportunity to sit and reflect on that and think, well, did we do a good job there? That was quite nice, because already you're thinking about, but what's next? And obviously, if you're like ourselves and you value live scouting heavily as part of the process, there's only a set amount of game weeks that you can watch players in. And if you don't maximise every single opportunity that you potentially have to be watching them in the most relevant games against the most relevant direct opponent, suddenly you can find yourself, and time's been and gone. So it's fascinating in that regard, in that, yeah, the reality is it's ever evolving and you're continually looking for what's next, as opposed to ever kind of really digesting and appreciating sometimes maybe what's actually happening right now.
How much continuity are you able to have? Does the technical director set you kind of a long-term strategy of the type of players that you're after as a club, or is it changing all the time? So obviously managers change quite a lot in football in general.
Yeah, they do, and that's something I think that you acknowledge that at times, yeah, that role, the person doing that may change. But I think, look, the best run clubs and certainly hopefully ourselves at Tottenham Hotspur, I think again there's just continual discussion, agreement and alignment between, you could say, key stakeholders. So that's typically ownership, chief executive, technical director, head coach, as to what should a typical recruit for our football club look like. Now, there will be nuances in how that player plays in terms of their actual skill set and profile, but I think the best run clubs are the ones from the outset where when they announce the player and they stand there with the shirt in their hand and you go, yeah, I think that's about right for what they typically are about, what they're aspiring to achieve. Hopefully cases like ourselves where there's a longer term strategy in place as regards to what the football club wants to continue to look like regarding a sustainability, squad planning. There should be, and as I say, in our case, there definitely is a level of understanding of what this person might look like, what age they typically might be. Again, an understanding or expectation of what experience might or should they have typically had I think if you look at our window in the summer, and you look at in terms of the players that we signed on permanent transfers, in terms of, I think, Kevin Danso, Matthias Tell, João Palhinha, Xavi Simons, Randall Colomawani, Mohamed Kudus, all, just as an example, exposure to playing in the Champions League previously. For us, if we're to continue to aspire to operate at that level, signing players with prior experience of managing those competitions in terms of from a game, a workload, like if you like, management. For us, there's a whole host of factors that go in, but whilst the head coach, and rightly so, brings a nuanced perspective on this is specifically what I want an individual to do on the pitch, I think within the best run clubs there is a solid understanding of what a future player for your club might and might not look like.
Very interesting. So do you have a very clear idea of your game model at Tottenham? Style of play, type of player, etc.?
I'm no doubt going to sit biased, but I think, look, yeah, as soon as any head coach is appointed, and obviously, look, for me, Simon, the proof is in the pudding, and we experienced a summer window in which we obviously had a head coach change. We experienced a serious injury to James Maddison as an example as well within that. But in the players that we agreed to sign as a collective, and obviously led by Thomas in that regard, they're all playing regularly and contributing to our 11. And for me, that is the best indicator that there is agreement and alignment in these different positions and totally different skill sets. If you consider what João Palhinha is capable of bringing to a starting 11 versus Mohamed Kudus, these are distinctly different players, but equally they reflect the qualities and the attributes that Thomas Frank wants to have within his team. So we have a strong understanding. Again, I think sometimes a strength can be with actually having levels of flexibility. So again, I think in some clubs it's a case where there's a strong game model and an understanding of style of play, and I'd like to think we're the same. But in terms of, again, recruits that are brought to a club, sometimes it's the desire of a head coach to have something actually slightly different so that I can change it. For example, if I predominantly have offensive-minded fullbacks, because predominantly that is how we play in terms of what their roles and responsibilities are on the pitch, rather than just have the opportunity to repeat that with another player with an identical skill set. Sometimes it's actually the request that I want someone a bit more defensive-minded, a bit more well-balanced, because this game model will be fluid, it will change, and if then within a game I want to affect that and I want to change it, that's how I can do it. So I'm aware that obviously styles of play, game models, philosophies are stronger, let's say, and more prevalent, they're more transparent than ever before. But I still think equally alongside that, having players within a squad who are capable of complementing each other and leading to you being able to win games in different ways, I think that is also still vitally important.
Yeah. And taking the summer as an example then, how involved would Thomas Frank have been in selecting the players that were signed?
As involved as anyone could be, and rightly so. I think I'm aware kind of sometimes externally there's always... And look, if our roles are predominantly around discretion and confidentiality, I appreciate that there's always going to be a level of almost mystique. And sometimes you can hear or see people reference, is this a club signing, is this a manager signing, a head coach signing, the dynamics have changed based on what they were, who's picked. I've never worked in a structure with a group of individuals where the head coach is not the one with the loudest voice with regards to the suitability of the player. At the end of the day, thankfully, given their qualifications and experience, it's them picking the team, not us within a scouting or recruiting department. So, rightly so, there can surely be no alternative to the fact that if they're not convinced, or the other way, if they're absolutely convinced, then if there is alignment across the leadership team as regards to that this is possible, it fits into our long-term plan, idea, strategy as a club, then those are the players that you should go for. So I think reflecting on my experience, whenever talking to players with a head coach or manager, always been very transparent in the respect that, are there any players within this work that you fundamentally would say no to immediately, that you don't like? Because if there are, we then discount them. Our role is to support you, to support the club, and to maximise our potential ability to be successful on the pitch. And we only do that by signing players that fit both from a club perspective, i.e. strategy, but also what you want. And then on the flip side, obviously then there is the question of, are there any other players that we haven't factored into this work that we are almost knocking on your door to discuss, that you would like to bring to the party? And as I say, I personally, if you are to be consistently successful within your recruitment of players, I personally just do not see an alternative, because the irony is kind of we feel, I guess, in our own little bubble within a scouting and recruiting department, that we're the ones who almost know these players the best, or we know them the most. We've seen them here, there, everywhere. The reality is, and it took me a while, I guess, early on maybe in my career to process it, the actual reality is that when you sign a player, you become the people who have the least to do with them. Because obviously they're working with coaches, medical, sports science, analysis. They're not coming into our office to say, oh, all right, guys, who are you looking at to potentially replace me in 3 years' time? And again, you have to, I think, in my role, I feel that responsibility that if we're to recommend players who everybody else in this club are going to have to work with on a human level as well as obviously as players, I have to feel like I can trust that player as a human being will almost represent me and my department in the appropriate manner. Because the reality also is, if they don't, you also soon hear about it as a club, because everybody's working life is affected other than ours, arguably. So as I say, Thomas was as heavily involved as any head coach that I've ever worked with before. And that is that, yeah, they are, I guess, ultimate responsible for the players that were signed. And I'm sure that if you spoke to them, they would own that responsibility and also endorse that is the only way that this can work.
Has there been a bit of a change in strategy this summer compared to last year? Because as you say, the players that you've signed have Champions League experience. They're more experienced generally, whereas we saw the younger players the summer before, Archie Gray, Lucas Bergvall.
Sure. It's always about getting a balance and having a squad that's complementary. Had the privilege to rejoin Tottenham Hotspur just short 2 years ago. There are a whole host of things from a strategic perspective that I wouldn't necessarily say needed to be addressed, but would enhance our ability to be successful moving forward. Obviously, at that time, with Ange as the head coach, we were definitely in a period of transition in terms of some of maybe the more experienced players that were leaving, either found it as the right point in their career to move on, or maybe found themselves not the ideal stylistic fit for how we wanted to play. Either way, that was happening. So how do you regenerate a squad in terms of, from an energy perspective, enthusiasm perspective? Equally, from a strategic perspective, it was apparent that because we were aspiring to play in UEFA competition, and even though we weren't in that initial first season, having people, for example, who can assist with a UEFA squad was also one of the objectives. So as an example, in signing both Lucas Bergvall and Archie Gray, not only are they top elite young talents and fantastic human beings, they will also assist the club not only now what they're able to do from an on-pitch perspective, but equally from a squad dynamic perspective moving forward, and from a UEFA perspective. So that was something, even that's maybe not the sexy stuff, or you don't shout from the rooftops that this is the level of detail and thought that's going on. That is what was going on. So look, within that summer in January, we signed players who would assist with our mid to long-term sustainability as a football club. But then on the flip side, as I say, it's about getting a balance and complementing what you already have. And we were then fortunate enough to have signed those young talents who, as I said, not only can contribute now, but also in the future. It felt natural, let's say. Well, if we've hopefully done a solid role in recruiting some of the most exciting talents across Europe and beyond, then actually from a short-term competitiveness perspective, because that is the most important, winning games is the most important thing, and tell any Spurs fan who was in Bilbao that winning things is the holy grail. So yeah, it felt, I guess, a kind of natural complement to what strategically have gone before, that the priority now should surely be to enhance the 11 in a balanced but in as many ways as possible, and give Thomas Frank and his staff different options across different areas of the pitch. So yeah, I guess in the 2 summer windows that we've had, I would like to think that from a strategic perspective, we've kind of satisfied 2 of the objectives that felt prevalent when rejoining the club. And look, we'll, I guess, moving forward, look to enhance in both areas moving forward now that we've kind of balanced them both off to this point.
And I'd followed Mohamed Kudus for quite a while, actually, because I've done a lot of work with Right to Dream. So I followed him when he went to Ajax and then on to West Ham. And I know that he is a fantastic character, actually, because, speaks brilliant English, well-educated. They do a lot of work on character there, outside of football. So I was wondering, how much are you able to scout character and personality?
I think, look, every case is different. So look, let's be clear with Mohamed Kudus, there were quite a lot of touch points that were possible. Obviously, Johan and Thomas have both Danish, worked in Denmark. So in terms of their links, let's say, and contacts within Nordsjælland, where he played and had moved from Right to Dream initially, to be able to get a strong level of insight from there. Equally, players who've played with him more recently. Again, you try to get a bit of a balanced view. So people who have seen him at different touch points in his career, you don't just want one experience repeating, because then that, I guess, can be a bit misleading or not necessarily as representative as it possibly could be. So within the work that we did on Kudus, it was clear that, I think now captain for Ghana, again, kind of having spoken with him, actually taking on almost quite a leadership role, and thriving off the fact that we do have some really talented young players, was something that he was looking to embrace, if possible, in his next challenge. So again, felt a real good fit for us. So I guess that's Kudus as a case. I think the reality is we it's the hardest thing to do, but it's also the thing that typically often makes the most difference. And I would say it's the hardest thing to do because everybody's points of reference as human beings are different. So it's not that you can't necessarily find enough people to speak to who've worked with them, who've played with them. But what I find, what I as a human being find annoying, frustrating, unacceptable, you might be sat there saying, I don't have a problem with any of those things.
Great point.
Or I've seen this guy in a situation where he's a starting 11 player and he played every week. If ever there was going to be the best version of a person, it's surely in those circumstances. What are they actually like when they're not in the team? What are they sometimes like when they're injured, because have they ever been injured before? And then what does that look like? As I say, I think I've learned that it's not hard to get the intel, let's say. The challenging bit is trying to understand the real reference points that you have in your club, your key stakeholders, and then how does this individual fit? So Thomas Frank, as example, has a very strong, and rightly so in my opinion, places a very strong emphasis, as a lot of head coaches have, but I guess he's been more maybe explicit in describing what it is that he expects. But he places a high emphasis on character and people. So one of his things that I know he's talked about publicly is about being confident but humble, about having discipline, but simple things such as being on time. And I know he said this publicly, one of his things about players, be present, be on time. because I can accept people making mistakes, but what I can't accept is people not being willing to contribute to the collective and not be on time. So, for example, whenever then we're trying to gauge the potential character personality of any player, you also have to acknowledge that we have some real kind of established lines here. So you're continually thinking in that context, what could this look like? Are there any indications that anything like this could be a thing? Because we know if it is, this is probably not likely to go well. So, as I say, I don't think it's necessarily that difficult to get intel. It's almost how you interpret it, because, as I say, people don't like speaking ill about people. They don't. As human beings, we're not wired to openly criticise people immediately or potentially talk someone out of having an opportunity. So again, you have to contextualise what somebody might be saying to you, and if you can skillfully challenge them, even a question such as, well, what's the most frustrating thing that you've ever seen? And almost try to really consciously try to eke out any little different thing. But as I say, it depends on, the people that you're speaking to yourself and what their expectations of other human beings are. And we are, thankfully for the planet, all very different.
Teamwork's intelligence gives clubs an edge that can enable smarter decisions faster. When most teams are drowning in data and not getting nearly enough out of it, Teamwork's intelligence can clear the way. Built by a powerhouse team of sports data scientists, engineers, and football data experts who have been shaping this industry for over a decade, we understand the challenges teams face. With data now at the forefront of scouting, recruitment, and team analysis, Teamwork's Intelligence has built a platform that turns billions of data points into precise models, predictive metrics, and insights that actually make a difference to a club's performance, both on and off the field. Ready to level up? Head to teamworks.com to learn more.
And how important is physicality? Is that becoming more and more important? Because it's the Premier League is a league of high-intensity sprints performed over and over.
I think the Premier League has positioned itself in such a manner where athleticism and physicality, if you do not have the ability to contribute to a game of Premier League football through one element of either an element of physicality or athleticism, your ability with the football has to be exceptional, because you will come up against athletes that if you are coming from an external competition that typically you just will not have played against before. And if you think that the Premier League has got to that point where literally almost everybody is they are an elite athlete first and foremost, obviously then that is very prominent within your checklist when assessing players externally, with regards to how, from that perspective alone almost, do we think they could potentially cope within this competition, and how does their skill set couple with that potentially look in the context of the Premier League. I remember when we were at Leicester and signed players from the Championship equivalent in France, for example, Ligue 2, and the players would say, even after pre-season games, that's the most intense game I've ever played in. And you think, but again, you have to understand it, and you have to learn if you're in my position, because you have to acknowledge this is real. So when we're assessing players, I think even Koulibaly, when he left Napoli to join Chelsea, I think he said, in Serie A, you can think and then you can run. In the Premier League, you have to think while you run. And again, if you consider the career that he's had and his sheer athleticism as an athlete, and he's still, after the amount of Champions League appearances that he's made, etc., and if he's then saying this is just a different world, it's something that you just cannot underestimate, because it is unique in that perspective. And as I say, it's positioned itself in such a way now where sometimes the potentially applicable future players for you as a club are getting less and less because look at who they're playing against. So many players are 6'2" and can run and can duel and can. It's if you look across Europe, across the world, in terms of different competitions, for example, that we cover predominantly. When you look at a team sheet, you look at the context and dynamic of a game, there is nothing that compares to this. There just isn't. Some are closer than others, of course, but across the course of the competition and all the teams playing in it, it's unrivaled.
Yeah. I don't know if a lot of fans realise that, and I probably didn't, but how fast the players run and how they do it over and over and over while twisting, turning, with the ball, obviously, it is incredible.
As I say, almost forget the football, their sheer athleticism is remarkable, and it is obviously, as I say, it's evolved the game to that point where this is what you have, unless you play one or two very specific positions and you have an unbelievably high skill level and, for example, exceptionally technically, as you say, it's underestimate it at your peril, and these guys are just unbelievable athletes. It's quite remarkable, and I think, again, that's one of the things that will always stick with me from a live scouting perspective. I know obviously there's a continued debate about where does data come in, where does live scouting come in, is it a dying art, etc. I think for me, the tempo of a game, the flow and momentum changes of a game, and then the athleticism of players involved is one of the real key things that you get exposed to live. Especially even actually closer down to the pitch sometimes, even from a scouting perspective, is it fantastic? Because I want to be able to see. But that's where you get a real appreciation of what does this look like from an athleticism, physicality perspective for these guys. And you then start picking up within a game who the quickest players are, how would they look in the Premier League. Then when I see the player, I might be there to scout up against them. What does this look like? What would I expect them to be able to do in this? Because again, it's such an important part of the package to be a modern day Premier League footballer, then that's something that you have to place a high emphasis on, and you have to be, more times than not, good at assessing whether somebody's suitable or not.
And linked in with that, you also scouting robustness, because that's so important. You could sign a fantastic player, but if they're going to be injured all the time, they're not of great value to your club.
Yeah, definitely. For just from every perspective, a coach will always want players who can play for him every week, even if he chooses to rotate, but they physically will be able to. A chief executive or someone finance related will want to be trying to maximise the potential value generation of an asset. So, the ability to have your players on the pitch regularly is a skill and can differentiate between or from teams who aren't able to do that. So again, as part of the profiling and assessment aspect of our process, the perceived robustness of a player is something that we value very very highly. Just as an example, if you were to consider someone like Mohamed Kudus on pitch, his strength, ability to hold opponents off is outstanding, and I think any Spurs fan will agree with that, having seen him in the stadium and gone, "Pwah, try getting the ball off this guy." So that's one aspect and fantastic to see. But then equally, if you looked at his time at West Ham, for example, outside of being called up for his national team and getting sent off against us and being subsequently suspended, he missed 2 match days. So he was never an unused sub. So if available, even on the bench, would always come on. So you looked at somebody like him and you go within his profile, the makeup of his profile, career history, etc. Not only do I see it on the pitch that I could describe this guy as robust, but evidence-based wise, this is a geezer who typically has found a way to keep himself fit, and he, as a result, already has been one of our most played players. Obviously, being away, scoring a decisive goal for Ghana this international break. As I say, it is actually a skill that players, I wouldn't say have, but again, the way that people manage themselves, I think it's a reflection on, physical makeup and genetics, but it's also a reflection on how professional they are. I mean, in my career, I've been at clubs and been parts of processes, fortunate enough to sign some real significant experienced players, people like Ashley Young, who we signed at Aston Villa on a free transfer, at Leicester City, Marcin Vasilevsky, Esteban Cambiaso. These guys who, you could describe as being experienced post-peak, if you like. But when you actually do the research and you hopefully, I guess, do your job properly, you very quickly understand that these guys manage their bodies, they manage themselves as professionals in such a way that they're still readily available to perform and be available. I mean, Ashley Young's playing at Ipswich, I think, now at 40 years old, and it's that aspect of the process, if you like, I think, is so insightful and something that, whilst it needs context, is vitally important when sitting in front of a Premier League manager, head coach, and saying, we think this guy's a good option, because you have to believe it yourself, or you shouldn't be saying that to somebody like that, and they'll soon work you out, I think.
That's not going to guarantee they won't get injured, though, I suppose. It's still going to be down to the way they're managed within the squad in training matches, luck as well.
And that's it. And you're 100% correct with that. I think my philosophy is control the controllables and try to minimise the risk and maximise the chance of success as much as possible. Yes, you can have a player who's shown an unbelievable level of robustness previously and they get injured with you. Yeah, that can happen, but I still don't think that should deter you from trying to ensure that you've done everything within your power to recommend the most applicable, suitable players, if you like, which is then the ones who also have the full package, i.e. high levels of robustness. But this is life. Things happen that we don't expect, especially contact injuries that, are unfortunate and not predictable, and these things happen. But as I say, I think if you show strategic discipline to your process and you factor in the right things, you will be successful more often than not. And as I say, for me, control the controllables and appreciate that you can't, even if you might like to, even though that'd be pretty boring, you can't predict the future. You can maybe have a strong handle on what might happen, but at the same time, we are just the same as everybody else. Things will happen. That's part of life, and football's not exempt from that.
There was one other part of this scouting jigsaw that I wanted to ask about, and that is financials, which is obviously key. Would you have a decent idea then to say what wages someone is on, what kind of transfer fee they will go for when you're looking at them?
I would say yes. There will always be slight differentiations between what you expect based on where a player's playing, what their career trajectory is to this point, what you're aware other people at that club might have earned at some point in time, for example. There will always be overestimations from people whose agenda it might suit to earn more money. There will be underestimations, etc., etc. I think over time you build an idea of the marketplace to such an extent that you can, to a degree, anticipate, second guess, again based on a club's transactional history, for example, other points of reference from players of a similar age, similar experience level who've moved from a similar competition. What did that look like? So what would we expect this to look like? Or again, based on that context, what would we almost be willing to go to as well? So yes, there are some deviations away from kind of a picture that you've built in your mind, but with experience, curiosity as to what's going on within the marketplace pretty regularly, I think you're able to generate a bandwidth that typically will be pretty accurate, And that's what I mean about, I think, as a club, strategically understanding who you are and who you're not. And so much about scouting and recruitment is maximising efficiency and time. And I think still, even though finances are vitally important, being able to be the first to the party for a player is still very important. So it's so vitally important to understand what you are looking for, to then be able to hopefully go out and actually execute it. Without that understanding what is there to guide you as to, as I mentioned earlier, what does a potential future recruit look like for your club and why. If you don't know that, if there's not that inherent determined aligned strategy, then your scouting operation just can't be as efficient as it should be, because you're covering everybody when the reality is you'll know these guys typically won't meet expectation on the pitch. These guys might do over here, but based on contractual situations, clubs they play for, it's highly unlikely that they will actually be available for us. It's finding that sweet spot of players where you maximise your time, energy, and then hopefully act and execute.
Yeah. I'd written quite a few topics down, but we've taken up most of the time talking about Tottenham, which has been fascinating. That's the way conversations go. I wanted to spin right back to the start of your career, actually, and how I think you were working at Birmingham University, weren't you? And then you got involved with Leicester City. So wondered if you could tell us about that to help other people looking to get into the industry as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, the research associate gig I had at Birmingham University, to be fair, whilst that was football focused, it had... realistically had nothing to do with the professional game. I think when I was at university, at Liverpool John Moores University, I had some fantastic role models there who'd worked and who were working in a consultancy capacity within the game. So the likes of Martin Littlewood, who I was fortunate enough to be able to shadow when he was working at Bolton at the time, obviously a very pioneering club, and did things differently and were heavy on sports science provision. Other guys in that space I was able to tap into. I guess I kind of continued to seek out any opportunity while studying that was then at clubs to expose myself to what it was really about. I finished my masters at John Moores University, and then actually had in my mind that I would maybe go down a sports psychology route and try and be a sports psychologist within football, which maybe that level of thinking, I guess I hope, maybe contributes to me thinking about scouting, recruitment, assessment of a player slightly differently, because I think about the player versus the person maybe a little bit more, let's say, or their career trajectory to a point than others maybe. But then an opportunity was advertised at Leicester City alongside doing a PhD at Loughborough University. It was just kind of split 50-50 in terms of the time spent, or was hypothetically that's what it was meant to look like. Within the performance analysis department, so working alongside Andy Blake there and contributing to what was going on at Leicester. So whilst it as I said, didn't 100% align with what I thought I was going to do, I also looked at it and I thought, well, hang on, here's a well-established football club that's now on an upwards trajectory with Nigel Pearson as the manager, just about to get promoted from League One to the Championship. Actually, would it be not better to expose myself, if this is the industry that I want to work into, what this looks like on the inside? Just see what it's all about, essentially, in terms of an infrastructure. It might be that I actually do want to go down an analysis route, having exposed myself to it or not. And look what Nigel built as a football club, an infrastructure, camaraderie. Look, I would describe it as serving the best apprenticeship in professional football that anyone could ever have, to be honest with you. I think Nigel Pearson, Steve Walsh, Craig Shakespeare, these guys were not only excellent at what they did as professionals, and they were successful, and I think their respective careers have shown that, but they were so embracing of others, even though I guess essentially at the time I was almost like a glorified intern, really, I guess, in that role initially. But they didn't have any ego, they afforded opportunity, they wanted to develop people. Don't get me wrong, it was I wouldn't say a tough school, it was a real football school. But if you could prove yourself to them, i.e. you not only socially could fit in, but you had a skill, you had something to bring to the party with regards to a skill set, they were unbelievably inclusive, no ego. They let you do things and knock on their door and say, "What have you thought about this? What about this?" So it was in that period that I kind of looked, and back then, this is 2009, and whilst doing analysis obviously on our own team at that point, I kind of remember sitting with Steve Walsh and being curious and saying, if this is the level of detail and analysis and scrutiny that's going on our own players, what are we doing on external players? And this was obviously at a time where data, you were only essentially able to get it for either your own games or your own competitions. Y-Scout, compared as an example to what it is now, I think you could request 5 players a week to be clipped up from one game, and that was it. And then you had to wait till the next week to ask again. So we tried to be a little bit innovative. We essentially used the same coding template we were using on our own players for external players. We highlighted them based on age, contract expiry, etc. Riyad Mahrez is I guess arguably the best case of us generating a level of insight and knowledge about him as a player that maybe other comparable clubs to us didn't have at the time. If I was considered now, from a data perspective, I would expect his expected assists, let's say, or his chances created at that period at Le Havre would have been absolutely through the roof. But because they weren't, and he was creating some unbelievably good chances, but people weren't converting them, if you then looked at just the normal, very basic, almost like biographical reflections of his season, to a degree, what was there to be excited about? But we felt internally that actually, no, this guy's doing some really exciting stuff. Shouldn't we be going out to France, watching him in Le Havre, etc.? So as I say, having gone into Leicester City with no expectation about scouting or doing scouting, having a career in scouting, that's then what I found myself finding almost the most passion for and moving into that. So I guess if I were to have any advice for people, it would be, can you in whatever capacity almost get your foot in the door at a club, because what you perceive to be what's going on might be totally different, and actually there then might be something within that hooks your curiosity as to what might be possible. What was created there from, I mean, look, not only what the club then went on to achieve on the pitch, but in terms of what they created, in terms of the careers that people have had since then, some still at Leicester, it's quite unrivaled in my view. And as I say, look, I'm unbelievably grateful that, especially in those 3 people, I had the best role models across both life and working in professional football as I could have possibly had, and I will be forever grateful and appreciative that I was lucky enough to have that schooling, really.
So is that what happened with Riyad Mahrez then? You'd spotted in the data that he should be getting a lot more assists than he did at Le Havre?
I mean, look, there were, again, quite a few moving parts. So Steve Walsh, who was the head of recruitment and assistant manager at the time, who I was fortunate to work very closely with, he'd seen him play previously in a game. It was almost like 18 months prior. And I remember him coming back and said, there was this kid at Le Havre who did okay. He didn't set the world alight, but there was something there. So it was almost then fast forward 12 months and we begin a process on, can we find a winger capable of coming in January, supporting what we already have with potential future to go on. But at that time, we had little money to spend, was the reality. I think that summer we signed free transfers. We had a group of players who a lot of them were coming out of contract and weren't sure if they would be staying or not. So again, there was a sensitivity around if we were going to sign anyone, who do we sign? Because these guys are actually delivering on the pitch at the moment for us. So when I guess we started then this batch of work, if you like, on, well, who are people either in our competition, comparable competitions? One of then the criteria was contract expiry, like you've just asked me about, what anticipated transfer fee would we expect for a guy with an expiring contract at the end of the season in Ligue 2 in France. So then it was when we started to go through this level of work across however many players we seriously consider. I think it's maybe 6 across Europe, as well as other guys playing in the Championship or above. And it was then doing that work that we were then like, this feels like we significantly need to revisit this player. So I remember David Mills, who was the chief scout and had a very trusted opinion, and rightly so. He went out to watch Riyadh and came back and was positive enough about him and said, yeah, I think this is a good idea. So then when we sat with Nige to kind of again revisit and kind of bring his story to the party, Nige was then like, right, you and Walshy, I want you to go watch him. There was a very small window of opportunity to go watch him. Because obviously Steve's role was assistant manager as well, so he was present at every Leicester game. We played away at QPR. I think maybe we won 1-0. Vardy shot, I think, across goal. But that was a 12:30 kickoff on the Saturday, so to get to Le Havre and back on the Friday night, to then me be able to drop him off in time outside of Loftus Road was a logistical challenge in itself.
Yeah.
And the actual day of going to watch him play against Auxerre was, again, people who do live scouting will be able to confirm or attest that, I mean, the things that happened, I didn't think we were going to get there on time. It was carnage when you're actually leaving Heathrow Airport at 9:30 in the morning and you can't get to Le Havre for an 8 p.m. kickoff. Like, how is this possible? But I guess going back to it, yeah, the thing that stood out with Riyadh was just the sheer positivity within his game, the ratio of times he would take players on and be positive, either with a line-breaking progressive pass, chance created, the quality of chances created. Based on this other group of players that we're looking at, he essentially was off the charts. And you're kind of like, if he can translate this to the English game, based on his physicality or lack of, I remember sitting in some stadiums even after we'd signed him and listening to the scouts talk around you. And have you seen this Mahrez at Leicester? He's built like a stick. He's this, and you were like, but have you tried to get the ball off him? And it was then fascinating, really, I think, for me as a learning experience. Obviously, look, we were fortunate enough to sign him at Leicester, and he's gone on to have an unbelievably successful career. But he still plays the game in the same way, and almost those ratios, if you like, of work we were doing internally around sheer positivity, what's almost a percentage chance that he's going to dribble or do something we were creating internally. If you then actually assess this time at Man City, as an example, those ratios were exactly the same. So he managed to transcend the levels by playing in exactly the same way. And I think if ever there's a special attribute or quality that somebody can have, dearie me, that's not a bad one. So yeah, he was just an excellent, an outstanding player. I think it's as simple as that.
Is it getting harder and harder to find gems like that, unfound gems, because of the amount of data and video we have, as you say, that wasn't there then? And I'm thinking, like, well, I mean, John Duran, who you signed at Villa, you could say that he was one of those kind of undiscovered gems. But generally, is it getting harder?
I think the fundamental answer is yes, based on more clubs than ever operating in a similar fashion, i.e., with a business mindset that we want young talented players who will have not only growth potential as a player but equally from a financial resale perspective. So you now have far more competitors than ever before. There is still opportunity. So like you mentioned there with John, I'd argue similar with Lucas Bergvall, who we were fortunate enough, or we were able to convince to join us ahead of Barcelona, which was a fantastic coup for the club. I think maybe the opportunities in which to sign these guys is the window's getting smaller and smaller, and you have to be able to react to less information faster. So in the case of John Duran, like you mentioned, it was a guy who was signed out of Colombia, I think at maybe 15. He made his debut in Engarvado at 15, but moved to Chicago Fire. I think it was a record transfer for a teenager coming into the MLS. He had a slow burning start to his season, and why wouldn't you? You're coming from Colombia, you're coming to a new environment, new language, new club. But then it was kind of the back end of that season where you felt like maybe his performance level had stabilised, and actually it was then something really significant. So, like, for example, I mentioned him earlier, Joe Bucknell, who joined us at Tottenham but worked at Villa before. I remember him highlighting very much that there'd been a consecutive run of games towards the end of the MLS season in which Duran had then started to spike. So then was something based on our what we were looking for at the time, in terms of obviously Ollie Watkins as an established number 9, but then was there somebody who could first and foremost support him, but then maybe overtake him? So again, back to knowing what you're looking for. So a 19-year-old athletic striker in MLS is actually, depending on performance level, is potentially applicable. So almost then the work starts there and then. And when we presented him to Unai in that first January after Unai had joined in maybe the October, he was then of the same opinion that this was a unique case in the market and quite interesting. And I think, again, with Lucas, and here, by the way, is an unbelievable talent. I think I'm very cautious when credibility is everything, and I guess your opinion is all you have to go on, or all you have as your badge of honour. I'm usually very, very calculated, let's say, with how I view a player, because I'm aware that so many things can happen. But I think in the case of Lucas Bergvall here, is a genuine generational talent and a fantastic human being, and you realise that as soon as you meet him, that this is different. Here's a kid who has the humility of a 18, 19-year-old at the time, but who looks you in the eyes and gives you the impression that this guy can hold his own. And even if he will have the humility to listen to people older than him and show the appropriate respect, here's a kid who'll say, give me the football now and that'll do my talking. And that, again, you look at how stable and fantastic his family environment is. His brothers are players, Rasmus and Theo. His mum was a player. Just a fantastic support network that matters when you understand that there will be rainy days in football, and it's then who are people surrounded by and how likely is that to be what you want them to be surrounded by for them to come out maybe of the other side of anything. So with Lucas, it was a player who everybody knew about. I mean, the fact that he trialled at various clubs and for whatever reason things didn't quite go for him there. I remember sitting with Johan Langer and discussing him, and strategically, as I say, we'd identified, could there be any young, exceptional talents out there who could actually assist us both in the near future but also longer term for the football club, and really bring that excitement back to the supporters and someone to resonate with. And at the back end of his final season before we signed him in the February, it was on his birthday, his level of involvement at Djurgården and in games, the fact that he was trusted to start and complete games in different positions, you just felt something it all started to piece together. So even again, he was a known quantity. You kind of then looked at this isolated group of games and situation, and you thought, but are people actually externally acknowledging that this is going on? Can they see it? Do they know? And we were fortunate enough, as I say, hopefully we're also good enough to execute what was a rare opportunity, a small window of opportunity, but based on the work that we'd done, the knowledge that we showed him and his parents that we had about him, his life to that point, his qualities as a footballer, how he would fit, that, we found ourselves as a football club in a position where an 18-year-old travelled to Barcelona, a club that I think even in the last 72 hours or so, Steven Gerrard, in the context of talking about Trent, has referenced, if Barcelona or Real Madrid's call, your head gets turned. We had done enough and convinced Lucas and his family enough that we were actually where he wanted to come. So he visited Barcelona and left Barcelona to go back to Stockholm to think. I remember me and Johan were on flight radar looking at whether his flight was actually taking off from Barcelona, because we knew what flight he was on. And you were like, is he on that plane? Is he going back, or is he just going to stay and is he going to sign? Because let's be honest, the normal timeline, if you go visit somewhere, maybe is then the second club would be, you're just going to stay there and sign. So you're kind of like, it might be an advantage that we're in this process as the first club, but equally it's easier to leave the first club in the knowledge you're going to the second. It's harder to then say to them, I just want to go think about, because they'll be like, but what's the problem? So I remember we were that excited and invested in it that we were like, is he on that plane? And then checking the WhatsApp messages and going, they're on one tick. Mate, this means because you're like, if he gets back to Stockholm, we've got a real chance here, because you don't go there if you're just going to sign. And then, yeah, sure enough, the news then came through that his choice was us. And that, yeah, even though we signed him the day after deadline day in that January, we signed him on deadline day, went to collect him and his parents from Stansted. And I guess he, as I say, falls into the unappreciated gem talent, if you like. But as I say, I think the reality is the window of opportunity now to sign these guys is getting smaller and smaller. And also, it's often when they're younger and younger than, for example, when we signed Riyadh, and I think he was 22 as an example. Now, in 2025, you imagine that this transfer, like Lucas at the latest, is probably happening when he's 18.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, so the clubs are actually going younger now rather than finding the players in those different territories that maybe people haven't heard about. That's their way of getting someone unproven.
I think because the Premier League has developed as much as it has, it is getting harder and harder for a player over a certain age and experience level in a peripheral competition, let's say. It's getting harder and harder for them to potentially be good enough. And almost the reality now is, if they show the potential to be good enough at a young age, that is when players will start to move more and more. And as you say, you assess the marketplace now in 2025 and the age of players that are moving, the lack of experience that they've accrued to that point. They're moving earlier and earlier because the reality is everyone is almost in a calculated foot race to sign them. So everybody has to go early and early to try to get a head start. If you wait, they will have gone, and then they will be at clubs that are maybe difficult or not possible to sign from. So it is definitely an emerging trend. And I think even we've seen it this summer where, because that's happening at that end, then if you're looking within your own competition, actually players that people are willing to pay a significant fee on may actually be a bit older than what people have been doing in recent years. Obviously, it's people like Man United, having signed Brian and Boomo, Mateus Cunha, ourselves having signed Mohamed Kudus, Arsenal, in terms of who they've recruited. Actually, if they've played in your competition, even the top clubs now are prepared to sign people a little bit older than this, because they've all gone when they were young. So then you hit this sweet spot that everybody's kind of trying to find, and actually there is not a lot of players in there that are actionable, or then if they're actionable, are they good enough?
Definitely. Well, that's fantastic, Rob. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a fascinating chat, and I could have chatted a lot longer.
No problem. I hope that's genuine and you're not just being very, very, very kind. So, perfect.
Thank you for listening to the Training Ground Guru podcast in association with Teamworks Intelligence. We'll be back next month with another episode.